I think I just hit a file size limit. I'm just saying I'm getting the fixing screw in place for the lever that operates the moving flash contact. That's moving freely, that's all in place. That appears to be good. This little component is actually two components, and they're held together with a tiny little spring at the base, and at the moment it's held together with the tiny little spring at the base, but if it falls apart it's a nuisance putting it back together. Just get that seated over its post, get it down in place in the case. Check that that's not right, that needs to be round there somewhere. Another notch, I think. That sounds right. I'm just checking that I've got that correct. In the rest position, with this arm back, with this piece back against the case underneath that arm, stopping it from moving, the toe of the cam should be pointing this way. This piece should be free to move along the side, the flat side of that cam. And that's as it is at the moment, that's correct. It only goes in one position, that mechanism, and if you get it wrong, things do not work. But it's not overly complex. Right, the cover plate that goes on the top. To get this, there's a tab on it here which tucks into the case. There's a hole here, and there's another hole here that have to go over that shaft and that shaft, and you get all this done all at the same time without disturbing these two standoffs that I've just put into position loosely, and everything should go well. You have to make sure that this arm is not behind here, that it's over that side. You need to make sure that this spring is on this side of that pin, and that standoff just jumped out from under there just to annoy me. That's back where it came from. Get that back where it came from. Okay, we're still in the screen only, just. There's a plain screw goes at this end of the mechanism. I'll get that run in place. We're getting near the end of the day here, so there's sun is driving directly into the window beside me, and I'm sure the image is quite contrasty. Here's the setting lever, the flash sync setting lever. I'll slide that under that spring, and the shoulder screw runs through that. Get that started. Get that most of the way down. Then I want to get this spring seated. The spring needs to be seated against the stud on that arm. There it is. And I can tighten that screw up now. Tighten the screw at the other end. That's all snappy in its action. Everything moves freely. All looking good. The B lever. And the B lever is very important. If you want to be able to hold the shutter open on B, effectively what it does is it interrupts the action of the main lever to stop it completing. Get this in place. Sometimes it's difficult to get this in place without the spring becoming dislodged and ending up where you don't want it. I've got to get this end of the spring back behind this corner. Normally it's easiest just to hook it with the end of the tweezers and drag it back over there, like that. Tuck it in. It worked. The other end of this spring needs to come to the inside of this lever, so I've got to pick up that loose end of the spring, lift it over that lever and drop it into that groove. There it is. So that's now sprung loaded. Is that spring seated correctly? Now it is. And this is sprung loaded. Things are looking good. Check that that screw holding the B lever is tight. It wasn't, but it is now. And check that everything moves freely. It does. Now the spring on that mechanism there, I haven't put that in place yet, and I should have put it in place earlier, so I'm going to have to struggle with that now. Let's see if I can drag all of that back into position. Got to hook that spring into the hole in the arm. There. And pull it back over a post at the other end, and that's awkward. Let's see if we can find that again. Where is that hole in that arm? There it is. Pull that B lever back out of the way. This is not the approved method. However, it worked. Okay, I'm just checking that I can cock and release this in both the X and M settings. It runs smoothly. That's run smoothly. Okay. So, things are closing in. The shutter release lever can go on now. I'll just give this a quick wipe. This fits over this post. The spring has to be tucked down underneath that green lever, tucks down in the gap beside the case. It's awkward to get in there, but it's done. Two pieces need to be cleaned now or we're going nowhere. The speed setting is cam plate and this piece, the main lever. Both of these are a little bit greasy and they're probably a bit dusty from that grease having collected dust. Shutters are a little bit open to the atmosphere. Some people think they're a bit like a watch, but watches are very well sealed. Watches just have a crown for winding them, and that's usually the only opening. Shutters have got shutter releases. They've got a mechanism for cocking the shutter. They've got a mechanism for changing the diaphragm setting. All of those things are openings into the case. So that means that they're fairly open to the atmosphere, fairly open to contaminants, atmospheric contaminants, and dust and grit. So this cocking ring, this main ring, I usually wipe around the outside edge with molybdenum paste, the inside edge. This pawl is called the bird pawl, and I usually wipe some on the front of that, and this little piece sticking up at the back, wipe some on that. that tracks down these grooves. That stops it from falling into places it shouldn't fall, so that in one direction it moves in one orientation and in the other direction it moves in a different orientation. I'm putting a bit of molybdenum paste on a couple of spots here, and on the retard gear train, on the side of the lever here, and on the pallet lever at that end. That'll do me, I think. Now, get this in all together. I'll cock the action there for the flash sink. I want to swing that spring into place. It sort of goes in underneath the B lever, so it's always awkward to get in there. Get that in there like that. Hold back that tab, swing that lever back out of the way, drop that down in place, make sure that's seated, everything's looking good. Get that spring hooked over its post the right way up. Check the action, that's good. One more spring and we're done. There's a tiny wire spring here, has to hook onto that lever. That's done. Everything is seated. Everything's looking good. So, the shutter speed settings cam plate, I'm running some molybdenum around the surfaces that come in contact with the stuff here. The retard gear train, it's these surfaces here. The spring for the 500th of a second, it's compressed at this point. There's a groove in here that picks up that spring and compresses it. That should be it. Let's get this into place. Got to make sure the B lever is not trapped underneath. It's sitting at the B setting. Let's see what happens. We cock it. Yeah, that works. Yeah, something interesting there. Those shutter blades don't open all the way. See how they're hanging into the frame? That means that something is bent. Probably because everything was glued up. So, what is it? What's bent? To find out. It's got to be here. That's as far back as... What's not happening? That blade, yeah, let's unhook this, let's see if we can see anything. It would only make a difference at the F2 setting, but it's unusual and it shouldn't be like that. Is there something bent? So this is not opening all the way. And that, I think it's this tail here. No, that's too far along. What is it then? Let me get this back together again and see if I can figure out what's not happening. I'm just looking at the flash contact in case that is preventing it from opening all the way, but it does not appear to be the case. This is quite hard. It's very hard for anything on here to be bent the wrong shape. It is very resistant to being bent. The only thing I see that's slightly off is the angle of that tail there on that bird ball. Now, is that it? Is that what's doing it? Put this together again and have another look. I'll have to investigate this closely. That goes there. Yeah, it's that bird paw. It's the tail on there. That's bent inwards. I said it was look slightly bent. That's what's doing it. It's preventing that from opening all the way. Let's see if that'll straighten up without breaking. That looks okay. And I'll try assembling it again and see what happens. That certainly appears to be the component that's causing the problem, and that was the component I'd identified as being bent. This is not wanting to seat. That's better. That spring hooked over its post and see if I've succeeded. That spring does not want to stay where I put it. That's better. It's under there, that's under there, that's under there, that's seated. Let's try again. Make sure the B lever's not trapped. Like that. Cock it. There we go. Shutter blades are now fully open. What a funny business. Okay, well that's interesting. Can't remember having striking that before. Where's our front ring? Just clean this, put this in place, and then fit the outer case to the shutter. It only goes on in one orientation, otherwise the little lock tab has got nowhere to go, the little rotating lock. That's very good. I'm quite happy with the state of that. Now, can I get the outer case on here? And first I've got to clean the outer case. God, the sun is going down. I've got minutes to go. So I'm wiping the curved rack, make sure I've got all the dust and so forth off that. And I'm wiping the detent for the aperture settings. Right, so that curved rack, I'm going to wipe that with a bit of molybdenum paste. Now, to get the flash wire seated correctly, hopefully that plastic insulator hasn't fallen into somewhere I don't want it. No, I think that's all good. Let's do up that screw really quick. Where's the screwdriver gone? There it is. Cock the shutter, drop that curved rack down into position. Get the case on the back of the shutter, line up the two holes, put the fixing screws in place. This is the one that holds the shutter in position on the camera. It's usually a little bit misshapen because it's not a very strong screw, and it's often been abused by people using, oh, it's just been a bit rough. And this very short screw goes at this end. The detent for our aperture settings goes in here. This is not symmetrical. The gaps are wider between settings at the large apertures, f2, f2.8, etc., and close together at the other end. Yeah, we're good to go. We've got a shutter that works. Have we got a lens that's clean? That's the next question to be answered. Clean the inside surface of the lens. Now I'm very interested in the state of this because this is a camera that has been kept safely for the last 70 odd years, somewhere relatively dust free, probably a relatively even humidity, and I'm interested to see what state that lens is like because, as you probably know, the Schneider Xenons and the Retina f2s are prone to haze on the internal surface. That looks good. Honestly, that looks very good, so I don't think it's suffering from that, which suggests that it's been kept away from whatever atmospheric contaminants cause that glass to oxidize or whatever it is that happens to it. Now this is the front trim ring from the front of the shutter. It just fills a gap, doesn't serve any other purpose, and it doesn't space the lens. It doesn't position the height of the lens, it's sitting loosely in that spot. But it just covers everything. So I'll clean the inside surface of the front group. This is probably the second most prone to hazing. Why that should be, I've got no idea. They're quite similar. Okay, I'll clean the outside surfaces of the glass. When you're cleaning glass lenses, just keep rotating the cotton bud in your hand so you're presenting a clean surface of cotton to the lens at all times. It helps avoid the likelihood of you picking up a fragment of grit and grinding it into the lens surface, which would be highly undesirable. I've got the window beside me so I can judge how clean I've got the glass very well from the reflections from the window. It's a great resource. So the retaining ring and the spacer shim here, I'm just making sure they're clean. The spacer shim is usually quite oily because that's closest to the focus helical, which is where the oil in the shutters probably emanates from. Right, our shim ring goes on there. The camera body is sitting over here. Let's get this shutter in. Check it's seated. See if it cocks. No, must be the timing's not right. It didn't want to complete. So I am one or more teeth out here, probably only about one. Let's move that back one tooth. Try again. That cocked and completed. I'm going to check it on a 500th of a second. That's where the winding mechanism is under the most tension, and if it's not, timing's not quite right, that's where it will show. No, that cocked nicely. That's ideal. That's very smooth in its action. Let's put the retainer ring in place at the back. Get that seated in the slot. And where is the spanner? Here's the spanner. Get that started. Stir it up finger tight. Check the action of the cocking action. That's with 500th of a second and it has no problem cocking it. That is all running very smoothly. Check that the focus is smooth. That's good. I'll tighten that retaining ring up now. So I'm fairly happy that that's it. It seems very good. Yep, that action is very, very smooth. That's probably one of the best Retina IIa cameras I've had dealings with in a long time. It looks pretty and it works like a new one. So, clear away some of the detritus. Where are we? Here we are. So that's a Retina IIa. A nice pretty one with its paint, nose ice bumps, and ready to go back to its owner. Thanks for watching.